This episode of Incident Analysis is brought to you by Platinum Storage Group and Real Estate Investments. For USCFootball.com, I'm Keely Eure here with Dan Weber for Incident Analysis of Day 17 of the Todd McNair NCAA trial. And today we heard the last piece of evidence. It was a video deposition of Patti Ohlendorf, who was on the appeals committee for the NCAA. She was on the committee that oversaw the appeals of the COI ruling on Todd McNair. And I thought it was an interesting video deposition in the sense that she really gave a window into the appeals committee and the details of that whole process that we haven't fully gotten to yet in this point in the trial.
Yeah, there weren't a whole lot of details because it didn't look like there was a lot of process. I mean, that was the issue. She's, I think, kind of was the number 2 person at the University of Texas and like their top lawyer. She, believe it or not, she oversaw athletics when Texas played USC in that famous Rose Bowl. So, she's somebody that's, you're an important person if you're overseeing the Committee on Appeals. Although every case they ask her about or trends or whatever, in her time on the Committee on Appeals, I think she said at least 20 appeals and that's fairly major when an appeal reaches that committee. They haven't really overturned any of them. And maybe she said they might have modified or tweaked or whatever, but as far as actually overturning an appeal, the appeals committee probably doesn't seem to do that. And that was the big discussion today, is the USC case. Was there enough in the USC case to maybe get a real good look from the Committee on Appeals?
So she kind of showed how the sausage was made a little bit on the appeals committee, and she's a lawyer, but she wasn't really coached by the NCAA's lawyers as much as the other witnesses we've seen. So she kind of had more honest answers than we were used to in this trial, and she kind of showed how the appeals committee didn't really do their due diligence when the case came to them.
Well, I think she would say, we did our due diligence. Our due diligence isn't to do much. And I think that's the case, is that, they had one of their 4 pillars of whether they can overturn a case is, did they get it wrong? Did they base it on false facts? And that was the whole, appeal on, from Todd's point of view, is they had a materially false fact that was the key part of the major piece of evidence in the case. And they had it wrong. Who made the call, what it was about, when it happened, all of that kind of thing. And, she said, well, in the totality of all this stuff, no, we really didn't consider that much. And I think they did get some admissions from her that, no, if you're, a staff person, you really shouldn't be participating, and no, those people didn't talk up in the appeals committee. And, I think that the general feeling has always been from the McNair side that it was a total rubber stamp, that they didn't listen to him seriously, and it was kind of a waste of time. And I think after you listened to her today, you would probably say if you're filing an appeal with the NCAA, it's probably going to be a waste of time.
Yeah, she didn't refute any of Todd McNair's lawyers feeling that it's just a waste of time.
Right, it's, kind of a rubber. I mean, for example, they said things like, if you knew a member of the Committee on Infractions had already expressed a judgment about the key person in, the basic decision they had to make is, who do you believe, Todd McNair or Lloyd Lake? That was the question of the McNair part of the case, certainly, and the USC part to a great extent. And they asked her, if you knew, would that matter? Would that have mattered to you if you knew that somebody on the committee had already said, I think Lake got it right, and if she had told that to the person who is the coordinator of the Committee on Infractions, and he also agreed with her, would you, if you knew that, would that influence you that maybe this wasn't done properly? She said, well, if we knew it, but nobody told us. We didn't know that, so how could we act on something we don't know? And basically, a number of things, for example, having people not on the committee, not voting members, expressing their opinion, trying to influence the committee and all of that. She kind of said they shouldn't do that. But they said, well, then if that happened, wasn't that improper? And she said, we didn't know that. Nobody told us that. She wouldn't totally accept, the hypothetical or the question that said that happened. But she kind of said, yeah, that probably wouldn't be, but we had to know that, and nobody told us that. And so, that's the way it goes.
As far as the case goes, though, we got some updates with McNair's lawyers. They are withdrawing their claims of negligence and breach of contract, so those will not be in the jury instructions tomorrow. And the NCAA is still going to file a directed verdict, which means that McNair's lawyers haven't reached enough evidence to then have a verdict reached. So, not a lawyer, but that's my understanding. What were the details said today?
Yeah, I think you got it right. I think it's relatively standard that you would, the defendants would say, hey, they didn't prove their case, and I think, Judge, you should direct that there's, that these 3 weeks actually didn't happen, and we didn't bring all, this juror. And Judge Schaller had basically already ruled that this case should have gone to trial, and that there was enough. One would think that that would be just, whether that's a Hail Mary or not. I think it's kind of standard procedure, but I think they're going to come back at 8:45 to argue that before the jury gets here tomorrow, and then the jury gets here, and they're going to go 2.5 hours for Bruce Borlett, and then 2.5 hours. I'm guessing Costa Stojakovic is going to do the honors for the NCAA, and then dismissed for the weekend. And Judge said, it's interesting, because basically, if you look at the schedule, we get, if you go 9 to 12, that's 2 hours and 45 minutes minus the 15-minute break. And if you do it in the afternoon, 1:30 to 4, what are you talking about? 2.5 hours, but you take the break off. So it works out to about exactly 2.5 hours each. Whether that's, so I think Judge Schaller mentioned that, well, maybe we still have to come back Monday morning before we start deliberations to go over the final jury instructions, which he read kind of the 38 pages of generalized jury instructions. He speed read them in less than 20 minutes, and he needed a breathing treatment, I think, afterwards. But there were a lot of things you would know. The one thing that hit me is you're listening to that in the jury, and I was talking about fair process and what you can believe and all of that. If you're a juror sitting there, I was struck by they might be thinking, wow, if I was on the NCAA committee that Judge Todd McNair, I wouldn't have to do a lot of these things. I could just bypass these things. I mean, doing your own research, talking to other people, bringing people outside the jury inside to, all of that was done in Todd McNair's case. Now, it's not an exact, replica of the jury system in the NCAA system, but you would think that people who are on this first jury and are very probably impressed with how it's supposed to go would be thinking, wow, a lot of those things didn't happen in the way they judged Todd McNair. So I don't know how that plays, but that was kind of my thought as he went through all of the possibilities for the jury.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I actually thought that. It was a clear reminder of, it's interesting because they read those jury instructions for every case, but in this case in particular, it was a reminder of, hey, the NCAA didn't really follow these rules of fairness, and that's something that came up a lot in Ohlendorf's testimony.
And not that they have to. They've got different procedures, and that's what Ohlendorf because they asked her about fair process and treated fairly, and she gave you that same look that when they ask people on the committee and they start, that give you that 100-mile stare, like, what are you talking about? And McNair's attorneys would always say, well, it's right in the bylaws. It says fair process, and it does? Or I don't know what fair means, or that kind of thing. But I think the jurors probably have some idea of how fair this was. And if you're Todd McNair and his attorneys, you say, thank the Lord for Joe Petito coming back to the stand yesterday and reminding everybody what the NCAA's version of fair process was, that they seem to be able to do. And I think Patti Ohlendorf made it clear too. What they are allowed to do is probably not what you or I would be allowed to do, or certainly not what an assistant football coach would be allowed to do.
Yeah. This is something that you and I have talked about while in the breaks of this trial, and I think you wrote a column about it too, but it's the question of malice. Did the NCAA show malice towards Todd McNair in their findings? And it's an interesting predicament because the NCAA seems to have with their witnesses this kind of game plan to just mark everything that happened as a mistake. We made a mistake, but it wasn't towards Todd McNair. It just happened to be a mistake. How do McNair's lawyers have to prove that there was actual malice in this case?
Well, I think what you would do is you would say, first of all, I think every close call, or even non-close calls, went toward Lloyd Lake or toward Todd not having credibility. And I think you have to say, what ties these together? How is this, because they would say, oh, we had nothing against this guy. Nothing at all. It's just he turned out to be an unethical, corrupt, lying, no good so-and-so, which half the people, it seems, that were on the committee were putting into email form. So, I mean, did he get fair treatment? They all say, oh, absolutely. We couldn't have, given him more fair treatment. But then you have evidence that shows that people look like a number of them had made up their mind, and they were worried that the other people hadn't made up their mind to agree with him. And the longer the deliberations went, the longer, the more they came around. And by the end, we still don't know, was there a vote or was there not? Who wrote the report? I mean, these are things that the NCAA hasn't been able to clear up. And I think one of the jury instructions was that if there are facts that somebody could clear up and they don't, you could take that against them. And I think there will be some of that, with the NCAA, because they basically haven't cleared up who wrote the report, who changed the words, who changed the facts, and how did you get from these penalties to these penalties with some sort of reasonable explanation in terms of Todd McNair's involvement or not. And did they, in the final report, it almost looks like they tried to hide Todd McNair. And he was the only, they found lack of institutional control against USC, which allowed them to give these really, really big, most, severe penalties in modern college football history. And yet, absent Todd McNair, they would have had to say, but there wasn't a single person at USC who knew about it, who was involved in it. Nobody at USC broke any rules. Nobody at USC helped anybody break any rules. And even with Todd, they say he wasn't part of it. He didn't do anything about it. All he did was, after Reggie Bush had left USC and left college football, he was told about it, what was going on with Reggie, and he didn't report it. That's it. And for that, you get the most major penalty in modern college football history. They can't square the circle on that. How that happens tomorrow in the closing argument, I don't know, because I think Todd's attorneys have made a decision. They didn't want to re-argue the USC case. They didn't want to make this about USC. This is about Todd. The question is, can you come to a complete understanding, if you're totally outside the world of college football and the NCAA and all that, can you understand that if you don't let people know why was it so important to those people to do what they did to Todd? What made it so important? Because you can believe them when they say, oh, we didn't have anything against Todd McNair. Well, then why did they do that? I think the question that they have to make sure that the jury understand there was a motive, there is a motive for them doing what they're doing now, and this is it. And you have to make that about USC.
Do you think they will do that? Because as you said, they've kind of steered away from the whole USC thing, but I think that motive link is missing and could favor in the NCAA if you don't know, well, why did they do this? Maybe it was just a dumb mistake, you know?
Yeah, maybe, they would like you to believe, we're just kind of Keystone Cops, and, the coach Johanna Meyer, and he gets things wrong, and Angie Creeder's the other investigator. Well, she wasn't really, she's kind of new at the job, and what they got wrong didn't really change anything, and we didn't need to ask Todd McNair all the correct questions because we knew he wasn't going to admit ever talking to Lloyd Lake, so we didn't bother to clear it up with him and blah, blah, blah. And maybe even Patuto said, I guess maybe a third interview with Todd would have been a good thing. So they're kind of, but they're trying to just say, we're just sort of, klutzes or clumsy or whatever, but, we didn't really mean to ruin this guy's life. If his life's ruined, it's his fault. We gave him a chance to tell us our truth, and he didn't. And now he's suffering. And hey, there have been some real bad guys that still got hired by by major schools and did a lot worse things than Todd did. And so he ought to be able to get hired by somebody, shouldn't he? Now, what they will not address is, but he was the only USC person found culpable in the biggest, basically the highest profile college football scandal case in modern times. So no matter what kind of penalty you gave Todd, you're basically saying he's the guy. I mean, nobody else at USC was guilty of anything. So if he's the only one guilty of anything, and it drew the biggest penalties, 30 scholarships, 2-year bowl ban in modern college football history, he's got to be, somebody who would want to hire a guy like that. Everybody knew he was involved.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Today was a shorter day because we finished that deposition, and then we heard jury instructions, and then we're out. Apparently the attorneys are now prepping for their closing arguments. They have extra time. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up for tomorrow?
Well, I mean, they're going to, they're going for defamation. They've always been about defamation, and, they got it wrong, and they published it, and they did so with carelessness and malice, and that's caused, just ruined Todd McNair's life. From then till now, and from now into the future. And the second thing, and apparently it's in the original complaint, is that they're asking for declaratory relief on the show cause penalty that the NCAA gave to Todd McNair, on the theory that a show cause penalty, meaning no one could hire him without basically having, going in front of the NCAA and the Committee on Infractions and explaining why you're doing this and getting their approval. That's not legal in the state of California. And, who knew? It will be very interesting if they could ask the judge to say and make a declaration that the show cause penalty isn't legal in the state of California. It would go, a lot farther than this case if that happens. But I guess there are no penalties for that. There are no actions required. It's just a matter of apparently just asking the judge to say that. But it would probably have some impact.
Interesting. Well, we'll see. Yeah. I thought you were going to say something.
No. Interesting is exactly right. Stay tuned on that one, how that plays out. It hasn't been a part of this case exactly. Yeah. But that would make people would pay attention if something like that happens.
Yeah, for sure. Well, be sure to keep it on us. We're at day 17. We're covering every day of this trial. We'll be sure to get you the closing arguments tomorrow. For Dan Weber, I'm Keely Eure. For more, check out uscfootball.com.